All right, we got another live stream here with Brian Mitchel from Acoustics and Emiko. How are you guys doing?
Great, great. Thanks for having us. Thank you, Gene. Nice
It's
to be
been a
back.
while. It's been
It's
a
been a
hot while,
while.
but
It's been a while.
we talked about the last time we were going to do this video on audio snobbery, and I was like, you know what, we should definitely do this topic because there is a lot of that.
Hmm.
And I think it's important to cover it from all angles, not just from the angle that if you don't spend enough money on a product, then it's not good enough or it's not audiophile enough. Because you get a lot of that. You get a lot of the subjective people that think that the more you spend, the better the product is. But on the flip side, the objectivist side is you get a group of people that only rely on measurements, and they typically rely on one measurement to determine how good a product is. And that's a real rabbit hole that people fall down in. So it's on both sides. It's on the subjective side and the objective side. And I think that's, we got some ground to cover here and give some examples and just kind of talk it out and see how collectively we could come together so we could all enjoy this common hobby that we all love to do, right?
Exactly. I think, this is an important topic because I think it excludes. I think that's the real key is that when you're excluding a group of people for any reason, I think that hurts the hobby.
Right.
And we can think of lots of reasons, and you just named measurements, but there's physical differences, gender differences that are also part of this snobbery equation that are not just audio measurements, but that's certainly part of it. Emiko?
What is Gene doing? I think. Don't worry, we got you. Okay, I'm on a green screen, so nobody can see. But there is.
You have a magic cup.
I do. You know what I'm drinking? I'm drinking snake oil. That's what I'm drinking.
Oh, no,
where did Gene go?
We lost Gene.
We lost Gene. That can't be right.
Keep going on his channel.
That can't be
say
right.
Whatever we want now. We're on Audioholics Live.
Sorry, my live stream, for some reason, when I use this computer, the mic just cuts out halfway in and I have to come back. So you guys can hear me, right?
Yeah, we can hear you fine. Totally.
You.
So I missed the snake oil. You're drinking snake oil.
I'm drinking snake oil, but nobody can see it because it doesn't exist. So it's invisible. See what I did there? See what I did there?
Translucent. I like that.
Yes. No. The biggest thing I think for me that and this week has been some sort of weird cosmic alignment of malintent when it comes to audio. Like I've been getting a ridiculous amount of hate mail, which I'm not going to say I love, but it certainly allows me to take the temperature of what's going on culturally in the industry and in the community. I think that I agree with Brian in that, and with Eugene, of course, that there's too much siloing. And so while there are people that are snobs financially, measurement-wise, but then there are also people that are music genre snobs, digital versus analog. Everything is a versus. Nothing is an and. No. Let me rephrase. Because I don't want to say nothing, because it's not all or nothing, because then I become a snob. I want to say that a lot of what I observe is there is a lot of verses, and it would be nice to have more and alsos. Because there are also budget snobs. There are people that say, if you spend X amount of dollars above this and you just think you're hot, Gene, can I swear on your show?
Yeah. I've said way worse.
Okay. Then
to Brandon, who supplied me the bourbon.
Yeah, there you go.
Thanks, my
buddy. But like there are folks that, they're budget snobs. There are people that are, you can get snobby down to the cartridge. You can get snobby down to the bit rate. You name it. Anybody can make a thing out of it. So my position on this is less versus more and alsos.
Yeah. Well, Brian, you and I have been going to trade shows for a couple of decades now, right?
Right.
I'm sure you would agree when you walk into certain rooms, there's a different feeling in some of these rooms, especially when the stuff's super expensive.
Mm-hmm.
They seem very inclusive to their small club, that you have to spend X amount, or they brag about. There was one room I was in years ago where the speakers were $500,000, and they had a model that was $200,000, and people were like, I wonder what's wrong with that one. What's wrong with it? What's wrong with it is it's 200 grand.
Right.
But it's like some type of compromise because it's only 200 grand when they have a $500,000 model. So that always kind of shocks me that, you know, you get that. And then you could go, like back in the day, you could go into a Bose store and there's a culture of that. The Bose fans, I think that because they don't know any better, they think Bose is the best thing in audio. People that don't know audio know Bose, you know, and I'm not trying to pick on them. It's just, it's an interesting group of people. It's almost like a cult, kind of like the Apple cult, you know, where people only will buy Apple phones or Apple watches or Apple computers. So there's definitely brand loyalty, kind of brand brainwashing, if you will. That factors into the snob equation as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, Apple certainly played their card very well to be able to create that culture that has people just upgrading every year. So it's hard to knock what Apple has done because, yeah, I buy a new iPhone like almost religiously. It's crazy. Like I have to have the latest iPhone. It's one of the.
Oh, you're one of those.
I'm like one of those. So I guess I'm the iPhone snob of the group. But see, that's just part of kind of the culture Apple has created. And I think that's a little bit different though than the audiophile culture, because they sell billion iPhones. Nobody's selling a billion pieces of audio equipment right now. So I think there's a big difference.
And then the other thing that really kind of turns this whole audiophile snob thing upside down is the fact that audio equipment has gotten so much better over the last decade or so, right?
Right.
So you go back 10 or 15 years ago and you spend $2,000 on a pair of tower speakers versus today.
Right.
Much better today. I mean, you don't need to spend $30,000 or $40,000 on a pair of speakers to get really good sound anymore. Back maybe 20 years ago, you did more than you do now. So, I mean, it's kind of, especially with a lot of these companies selling online, so they're cutting out some of the middleman profits. It's kind of leveled the playing field a lot. So you could really, and that's, I think it's important to understand that, because the next generation of audiophiles coming in, they're not, 50, 60-year-old men that have this huge budget that go spend $100,000 on a system and put on a Grace Jones record and smoke a cigar or something. This is the next generation of kids that you want to turn on to good audio, to be able to stream, to not look down upon streaming, because shit, I do 90% of the music I listen to now is streamed off of Apple Music or Tidal or Qobuz. I know, Emiko, Qobuz is your thing, right?
Well, I want to bring up a couple of points, Gene, just to build on, kind of if I play off the Apple topic. If you look at their stores, their retail stores versus a typical hi-fi audio store. So Apple stores are welcoming. They want you to come in and play with the gear. They want you to talk to people, like all the things that you don't normally get. Let's say if you're not of a certain class or you don't look a certain way when you walk into an audio store, you don't necessarily get treated the same. And that may be a slightly different topic, but I guess it's just kind of worth pointing out. What do the retail stores have to do with part of this snobbery? Does that,
my question is why, we're in a hobby, but we're also in an industry that is purely measurement people. Back off. Before you come at me for this, I'm just going to say this is just one side of a larger thing here. But, really the experience of receiving and listening the message of music is really subjective. Our ears are all different. The way that our brain synapses work, our depth perception, everything about each human body is different. And so the experience is so unique and so individualized that it's interesting, I think, from a holistic perspective, if we take a step back to look at why does the snobbery even exist from an emotional or psychological standpoint. I'm not talking about the retailers that want to try to upsell you and make more money. I mean, that's capitalism. That makes sense. Fine. I'm talking about folks that are listeners and that are music lovers that are going at it with each other? Is it because they get heated and so overly passionate about trying to make a point, and being right is more important than sharing information, exchanging different ideas, and sort of walking away from it going, hey, I don't agree, but that's interesting. Cool, I'm going to go listen to my system and hang out, right?
And
Or
that's
do they have to...
that's especially true with online user groups, forums, chat groups, Facebook groups. I think when you're behind a computer and you're not face to face like we are right now, people lose a certain decorum towards each other. You know, they're more comfortable in being an asshole because they don't think there's any consequences behind a keyboard.
Sure.
And at the other side of the equation on that, people want to defend what they already own, right? So if you have a Klipsch speaker and someone says the paradigm's way better, the Klipsch owner is going to be very offended, and they're going to go out of their way to defend why they purchased a Klipsch and why it's better. They're going to use confirmation bias, whatever bias they have, to basically try to prove their point. And then it gets ugly because it's online and there's no moderation. And, you know,
I mean, I think what's interesting is, like, I tell my group of audiophile friends that anytime you see something like that, just add the words "for me" or "for you" at the end of whatever. Oh, paradigm is way better. Your Klipsch suck. And for me, right? And that completely lowers the temperature of the entire, I think, the entire animus-filled exchange that somebody's trying to start. Because the moment you put "for me" or "for you" at the end of it, then you have sort of a line in the sand, which is no longer this is biblical fact. This is now your perspective. But people, I don't know why people don't take literally 2 seconds and just do that. You know?
So I think you're saying some of it's miscommunication online, or partially misinterpreted, not miscommunicated, misinterpreted, and just the fact that you're typing and you feel a bit of security behind the keyboard, that you say things you wouldn't say in public.
Yeah.
People get brave.
Keyboard commandos. Yeah.
Ooh, they get brave from their mother's basements. Oh my goodness. They do. Absolutely. Yeah.
And I think what I've noticed over the last couple of years too is aside from the snake oil stuff that, you know, I always talk about, and that's kind of, I have a pet peeve about that. And that's why it says pursuing the truth in audio. I feel like there's now snake oil with measurements, and you look at these websites. I mean, Audio Science Review is one of the biggest examples of this. They're a large website. You know, Amir is doing a lot of measurements. My hat's off to him for doing all the measurements he does on products, but they're all trying to categorize product performance on one measurement, a SINAD measurement, which has nothing to do with fidelity. And most of the SINAD measurements, when they're beyond a certain number, it's inaudible. But they'll argue this product is way better than that product because it's 98 dB SINAD versus 92 dB. Yeah, one measurement parameter. It really depends on how that measurement was taken, and that's inaudible. I mean, that's way below the threshold of audibility. There's so many other factors that go into performance of products that are overlooked as a result. So
just looking at the SINAD numbers, is there a inaudible threshold people should ignore?
That's a complicated question because it depends on the spectrum that you're looking at, the bandwidth that you're looking at, the loudness that you're looking at. I mean, there's so many different parameters to that. But in most cases, I can measure an amplifier that gives you 70 dB SINAD, which is not a great number, and the distortion on that is inaudible. Even maybe in anechoic conditions with headphones, you might be able to hear a difference. But it's just a bunch of BS. I mean, they're using measurements to justify, you know, a USB dongle that's $20 is better than a $4,000 preamp. That kind of stupidness in measurements. So I think it's important to realize that not all measurements are objective, because you don't really know how these measurements are being biased to come out with conclusions, especially if they don't actually listen to the product, use the product, check out to see if the product has operational bugs, if it's not doing base management correctly. I mean, there's so many parameters to a product performance. And then the other thing too is you get, and I'm not trying to pick on science people because I like science, but you get these people that say everything's got to be done blind. If you think one speaker sounds better than the other, it's because you're biased towards a better looking speaker or better brand recognition. Well, to my answer to that is, we don't just listen to a speaker. We experience the speaker in a room. We look at it. It's like furniture. Why shouldn't that be added into the equation of how things factor into your enjoyment? We're visual people.
Right.
That is, I do, as the only female, I'm assuming as the only female identifying person in this trio here, gentlemen.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right now, I'm definitely.
Chris.
I think
Cool.
I've always thought I was a woman trapped in a man's body, though. So I don't know.
Okay. Well, that's a different live stream for another day. But anyway, you know, that is very much like saying you really shouldn't talk about somebody's good looks. You really should base this solely on their personality, and not just their personality, just on their GPA alone. That's it.
Boil everything down to one number.
It's very
Yeah.
two-dimensional thinking.
Yeah, exactly. And that's not reasonable. It's also not true, right? Anybody that says they just only do that is lying. On whatever level, in whatever varying degrees, it's okay. And there's no shame in admitting that. It's just, what is the purpose behind keeping everything all about measurements, or all about this, or all about that, right? And that's, to me, that's the deep dive that I'm trying to do, although now I'm sort of regretting going down that rabbit hole a little bit.
I mean, there's two parts to measurements that I think that are concerning. One is there's not a standard in how they're taken with the same equipment at the,
Right.
like there's somewhat of a standard. They're supposed to be, if correct me if I'm wrong, Gene, like they're supposed to be a standard way to
The
measure.
standards are, I mean, there's some loose standards in loudspeakers. You got the CTA 2034, and again, that doesn't give you the whole picture of performance. I use the measurements more to make sure there's nothing really wrong with the product. You know, amplifier measurements are all over the place. I mean, you can't even get a company to honestly rate power, especially in AV receivers. They'll rate one channel driven at 10% distortion at 6 ohms on Tuesday if you hold your breath for 30 seconds underwater. I mean, it's it's just ridiculous how manufacturers kind of manipulate.
But now I'm going to say something controversial. I think measurements is a losing game. Like you can't, even though you can compare them, if you look at what, I'll go back to Apple and the PC industry. So Apple rarely talks about measurements. Like if you look at any of their MacBooks or iPhones, they never talk about CPU speed and megahertz and all the stuff that every PC person knows. And the PC industry fought that battle to where all of the profits were like taken out of it, because they were fighting this measurement of how many megahertz they could get faster than the next one. And they just competed each other to death on measurements. So that's why I say measurements is a losing game, but it's also confusing to a lot of people. Mm-hmm. Nobody comes into this hobby thinking measurements. Like that's the last thing on their mind. They're like, I want good sound. I don't want to learn science. I don't want to learn what SINAD is. I don't want to learn science. I just want, tell me what the good stuff is, right, Gene? How many times have you got that question?
Oh, all the time.
What's the best? What should I buy?
Yeah.
So anyways, I'll pass it back.
This is a good point from one of our viewers here. Every forum has 2 or 3 members that act like dictators, agree with our opinions or get out. And yeah, they generally have the most post count too. There's people on our forum that have, and I'm not knocking anyone that posts regularly on the Audioholics forum. I appreciate it. But there's people there that have 10 or 20,000 posts to my maybe 1,100 posts since I've been running the site for 22 years. Right. So they're very passionate about their beliefs and hanging out on the forum. So that is a pitfall that people can get into.
Well, here's a question for everybody, myself included, is I know the topic, the title of this live stream is Audiophile Snobbery. But what if it's not snobbery so much as stubbornness?
Yeah.
Because that to me is really, people will plant their flag and stand their ground even as the sand is shifting away from them, and they will still stand there like this no matter what, because it's more important to be right. And I've always found culturally that it's so telling that the further away somebody gets from being right, sort of the deeper they dig the flagpole in, right?
Right.
And I don't know why that is, because it's not like, let's pretend Jim and Scott are on an audiophile forum and they're talking and they're disagreeing and it's getting heated. But honestly, it's not like one of them's going to drive over to the other guy's house and break in and then bash their system with a hatchet. It's not going to happen. I hope, right?
Well, I'm sure there's been cases.
I'm sure there have been cases, but overall, like, is it just something about, is it that the hobby tends to attract that type of a personality? Is it
I think
that?
that's the forums in general have
Right.
become toxic, whether it's political or I read car forums sometimes. I'm into cars as well, and it's the same thing there.
Right.
I'm a BMW enthusiast. Years ago I used to think they were unreliable cars, and people are, exaggerating how good they perform. Then you get one and then you realize, well, shit, this is a really good car. And yeah, there might be some reliability issues, but your perspective changes as you have more experience with these products. And I think a lot of people on the forums have limited, narrow scope. They maybe have had 3 or 4 systems in their entire life, and that's all they know. That's why you get these diehard Polk fans or Klipsch fans or any brand. I mean, that's just what they grew up with. Maybe their dad had a pair of the speakers back in the day, and that's what they know. So they're going to, defend what they know. And in some ways, it's almost like a Dunning-Kruger effect. It's a cognitive bias of not knowing what you don't know.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So I think some of that kind of factors into it too.
It's a shame, because the whole point of, I think, I could be wrong, but I think the whole point of these, especially the audiophile forums, is supposedly, at least it says in the rules, to sort of support each other on the journey of this. And I don't know how verbally beating the crap out of somebody is supporting their, congratulations, you're here, welcome, screw you. It's like, that's not really productive. And it's interesting because, like, Gene, like you're saying, like, when you have these diehard Polk fans or Klipsch fans or whatever it is, right? And there's nothing wrong with it. But doesn't that sort of stunt the growth in the hobby? Like, doesn't that stunt the development and the productivity and the forward movement? And wouldn't one want to go, yeah, I used to really love those and I still like them, but now I've experienced these other systems and I'm adding more tools to my tool belt, right? That's really what this is all about. And I think the more variety one has, the better, frankly.
Yeah.
I think what's interesting here is, what are the entry points into hi-fi and home theater and headphones? Like, where do people first learn? What's their first exposure to the hobby? And I think that is part of it's part of the force that maybe is preventing it from growing. There's not enough welcoming places that get your like, I don't know what's going on questions answered, and being not afraid to ask dumb questions. Like, where do you go? There's more people with dumb questions right now than there are the experts that are planted in different forums right now. Like,
well, the one thing too is, I always think it's good to encourage people that are getting started out, even with small budgets. Let's say their first experience with audio is Sonos. Okay, Sonos is a good product. It's easy to use. It's easy to set up. Is it audiophile? No, not really. But it's a gateway to become an audiophile. You start someone off on a Sonos. You start someone off with Beats headphones. At least they're taking the initiative to not use the crappy little earbuds that came with their phone or whatever, right? They went out and they purchased a pair of headphones for 70 or $80. Yeah, it may not be the most accurate, may not be the most audiophile, but encourage it. Say, hey, good job on going beyond what comes with your product. Now you can take the next step if you choose to, and experience more that's out there, and not necessarily have to spend a fortune to get good sound, because today you don't really need to spend a fortune to get really good sound. I mean, if you're spending more money now, you're either spending it because you want more output, or you want better aesthetics, or you just want, more speakers in a room to do Atmos or something like that, So, I mean, you don't have to go and spend $100,000 or $200,000 on an audio system. And if you want to spend that kind of money, it's like someone going to buy a Lamborghini. I mean, you could buy a C8 Corvette and have incredible performance with a car that looks great. But at the end of the day, if you want the experience of a Lamborghini, the exclusivity of a Lamborghini, I'm not going to fault someone for doing that if they have that kind of money.
Right.
Absolutely. I think the other thing is there's this, I talk to my son about this a lot. The idea of understanding the difference of what to think or how to think. And this really is a versus situation, because I think it's just my perspective, but even through school, students that tend to ask really disruptive questions, using the word disruptive in a very positive, forward-thinking way, are called disruptive. They're called nuisances. They're called, not bullies, but they're causing trouble, right? They're troublemakers. Mm-hmm. When in actuality, they are hungry to learn. They're hungry to go beyond the textbook. They're hungry to go beyond the measurements. They're hungry to go beyond the history.
Right.
They want to learn the theory. They want to learn how to internalize it. They want to learn how to think more broadly about a topic. And I think audio is such a wonderful place where people can have that experience, because there's so many rabbit holes to go down, all of which are related in one way or another. And yet there are these factions of people out there, not everybody, but some, that try to preach from the mound and tell people what to think. And when someone raises their hand and says, yeah, but I have a question, they strike you down with a lightning bolt, and that's the end of it. So I think actually asking questions, and Brian's heard me say this to death, and I am beating a dead horse here, but This is the hobby where we're listening. Why are we not listening to each other? Why are we not listening for new information? Right?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I mean, I like what Brandon said before. Talking down to people is the worst thing we can do for our hobby, and that's 100%, because I'm really concerned about our hobby's future. With the people of our generation, Brian, are getting older. Yep. I mean, you're dealing with a whole new crowd of people now that maybe not be into the multi-channel, be into high-end audio, but we got to get them into it. And a lot of these demo areas that are set up, they're not embracing new technologies. And I love vinyl. I'm not making fun of vinyl, you know that. But you should not be looking down on streaming. You should not be looking down at multi-channel. There's 2-channel purists that won't listen to multi-channel. I made a comment the other day on our community tab about Dark Side of the Moon, Pink Floyd, that I was listening to a 4.1 mix of it. And I got like 20 people saying that's garbage. It could never be better than 2-channel. That's not true. I mean, they actually had a multi-channel version of that recording. Right. And it was in quad back in the day on vinyl. And imagine now it's all discrete and done digitally and remastered, and it's got a low noise floor. And it allowed me to appreciate that album, which I probably heard 2,000 times in my lifetime. Mm-hmm. It allowed me to interpret it differently because the experience was different, hearing different things around me, the way the mix was done. And I still will listen to the 2-channel version as well if I'm at my desk or whatever. But why are people not embracing new technology? Why are they stuck in the past? It's almost like the car enthusiasts that only like 1960s muscle cars, when a Toyota Camry today can pretty much outperform most of those cars. It's like, come on, move on. I mean,
well, Gene, there's a question there, which is why? I mean, I guess my question is, someone could like both for different reasons, right?
Sure.
And that's a big thing. Like, I think a lot of us do get caught up in evangelizing and championing new technology, new formats, because progress marches forward, whether we like it or not. And that's wonderful. But like, I'm somebody who's not just a classic car enthusiast, but I'm a Lamborghini girl, by the way, but I'm a vintage car enthusiast. Like, my dream car is a 1929 Ford T-Bucket. The weirdest, most outlandish thing that a girl could ever want is that. Don't buy me Louis Vuitton. Don't buy me pearls. Buy me a 29 Ford T-Bucket and I'll be happy. With the original parts, not just chassis and the inside upgraded, everything original. Right. And people go, why? That thing doesn't drive. And I go, that's not the point.
Yeah.
Right. So
Right.
I think there's room for everybody in the hobby, people that are into hand crank gramophones and phonographs, and people that are into vinyl, and people multi-channel. I mean, I've got a Victrola, so it's all about the experience, isn't it? In that sense.
Sure.
Yeah. What was I gonna bring up here? This particular I'll pass it back, Gene. Lost my train of thought.
Someone says here they have a cassette tape because they own about 40 of them. Hey, I've got a 3-head Onkyo. Yeah, I've got cassettes. I haven't listened to them in ages, but I still have VHS because I've got like my old wedding videos and stuff still on that.
Wait, we've got Gene, can I just say that somebody just commented, Brian knows about this. The word audiophile is stupid, they've written.
Yeah, I see that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we talked about this in Emiko's last video she did for acoustics, that part of the problem is the word audiophile itself. There's something wrong with that word, that nobody wants to call themselves an audiophile. Very few people.
It's got a negative stigma.
What was that?
It's got a negative stigma, and part of that
Yeah.
is some of the reviewers out there that are self-proclaimed audiophiles.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to mention any names from these guys a lot of these guys delude themselves, and the way they come off when they explain the hobby and the way they talk to people I think is off-putting, especially for a layman that's really not into it, that's just getting into it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think reviewers bear some of the responsibility of that. And especially reviewers tend to get so excited about the next product. It's like, as soon as when the new model comes out, the last model was all of a sudden trash. And now all of a sudden you got to have this new model because it's made with beryllium, magnesium, adamantium, plated nickel. And it's going to be way better than the model that it replaced 6 months ago. I think that's also
no, that's a good point. Like, we rarely test the new product versus the previous product.
Yeah.
Like, that's rarely mentioned in reviews. Usually you don't have both versions at the same time. And I don't know, it's just another thing that you kind of bring up a pretty good point, that a lot of times we don't know what the incremental difference is, if any, if it is better. But I guess that's why we look to the measurements sometimes, because there may be one measurement that says, okay, it's got 10 more watts or lower, whatever the spec is. There's something in there that supposedly makes it better. Is that typical of every new generation product, Gene?
Yeah, I mean, that's how companies sell products, right? I mean, car companies do the same thing. BMW will release a car with 360 horsepower, then the next gen will be 382 horsepower. It's the same engine. They just advance the timing a little bit more, put a little bit, they're holding their engines back so they can release the next version with more power. It's the same thing with audio too.
That's what Apple does.
Right. Well, Apple is even more sinister in my opinion.
Yeah.
Their phone stopped working after they throttle the performance back after a couple of years. So you have to go out and buy a new one. Right. That's why you're changing your phone so often.
That's why it gets so slow by the end of that first year. I just got to get the next one. But no, it's I buy it more for the camera than.
The cameras are awesome.
It's usually the camera.
Well, so that's a question, because Brian, you were saying how Apple doesn't necessarily focus on the measurements, but actually my experience has been that the things that Apple does focus on measurement wise are camera megapixels, right? And then whatever their processor speed is, but they don't go into a ton of other stuff. Oh, they talk about battery life. That's another big thing, right? But really about the camera.
Right. But they don't go into some of the more esoteric photographic measurements. And that's, I think, what we're talking about with audio measurements is.
Right. So my thought is, like, when it comes to measurements, it's interesting how the audio industry does go into that, and it bifurcates crowds into people that can follow or want to follow or think they should follow, and then people that just go, and their eyes glaze over, and that's okay, like, whatever. But Apple has found the the 1 or 2 measurements that matter, like give me the top 3 morsels and I'll dig into my phone on my own and find out that it works really well. And here's why.
Right.
So I want to defend. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. Go ahead, Gene.
So I want to defend measurements at this point now, because we've been talking about how, dumbing down measurements could be a problem. What I've noticed is most audiophiles are not into measurements at all. So they don't really know whether or not they've achieved the best performance they could achieve in their room. So I think it is important to understand measurements. I did a video recently about how do you know when you have a good 2-channel? And in that video, I showed that the frequency response at the listening position between the left and right speakers were virtually identical above the room transition frequency. I showed the RT60 decay time of the room was really flat and even at around 300 milliseconds. So there's not too much echo, but there's enough liveliness in the room so you can have the benefit of reflections. And I showed the spectrogram of the speakers to show that they're phase coherent at the listening position. So there are measurements that are useful that can help you guide you towards better sound. But a lot of audiophiles reject that. They don't want to have anything to do with that. And I think that's also the wrong approach.
Well, I think you're talking about like a post-purchase measurement. Like you bought something and now you want to optimize it in your room, get the best performance out of it.
I mean, people will go, instead of throwing more money at the equipment, how about you set up your room properly using measurements to help you guide that? And you'll get a much better experience with that than you would out of getting the next, silver plated speaker cable. A couple of good comments here. I just wanted to address them. Where is that one here? There was one about a receiver and now I can't find it. They just moved. Oh, this is an interesting one. Someone's defending their L800s. Those are awesome speakers if you set them up right. Yeah. And I think a lot of the reviewers got that review wrong because they put them too far apart, like they were a regular conventional speaker. And because they have that SDA technology with the interroll crosstalk, you actually had to put those speakers much closer together. And they were a very difficult speaker to measure accurately. We actually did measure those speakers correctly. Matthew Pose did. And let me tell you that have you ever heard the L800s? Have you ever done a demo?
I haven't heard them.
They're pretty incredible. They really are. They do create a very wide, spacious sound stage, but they're non-conventional. So you would look when you come into the room and you look at a speaker like that, you're like, that can't work. Then you got to sit down and you got to let your biases go, listen to it, and then understand the technology. And then you realize that's a treasure. So congrats on that. Here's a question I was going to answer. So someone has a 6500 Denon with external amp on all their speakers. Is putting the unit in eco mode cripple the pre-out voltage? No, it does not. What the eco on does is it lowers the rails all the time to the amplifier section. So it runs them at a lower bias. So the amplifier won't generate as much heat, but the preamp outputs are unaffected by that. So if you're using all external amplification, use eco on. But if you're using any of the amplifiers in your system, use eco auto. That way it'll go to the higher rail when you turn the volume up so you don't cripple the power going to your speakers. So I hope that answers that.
Yeah, I wanted to bring up another point as part of the missing component of the snobbery is what are the aspirational products in the audio and home theater category for people that are outside the industry or potentially for us too. Like, I think we all might have different aspirational products, and to the people outside, that's what may be missing. Is they want to jump into this hobby, but they don't even know what they should be looking for. So they go into forums, they poke around, they get borderline advice or treated a certain way that may not be the most appropriate, and it's just part of the negative impact of some of this hobby. Do you think that plays a role in very few brands stand out as either brands or products as aspirational? Like if you look to the fashion industry, there's many fashion brands women would look up to in terms of aspirational bags and shoes, and they could probably name them. I don't want to name them.
But you know them, Brian. That's the thing.
I know
you know them.
I know them because
you know all of them.
Right, exactly. exactly. But that's kind of my parallel point, and maybe Emiko can expand on it.
Is that because I'm female identifying?
No, I don't want. Okay.
Sorry, I'm just getting you back for what you said earlier here. I think some of that was pre-show. That's right.
Avoid speaker cable risers, including Tinker Toys.
Oh, see, I'm gonna say to Brandon that I don't know that I agree with that. I think avoid is one thing, but I actually have speaker cable risers, not necessarily because I think they make a difference or not for that reason, but because they bring my whole system together. I mean, my system is giant purple. Yeah, they're giant purple speakers. So you walk into my house and you're gonna get a treat for the eyes, whether you like it or not.
Well,
right?
You need to hide your speaker cables better.
I don't want to hide my speaker cables better. That's the whole thing. And also, there's also not room. I have a giant marble fireplace behind everything, so don't get me on that whole mess. But to Brian's point about luxury handbags, because that is not what this show is about. We should do that, though, for acoustics, luxury handbags. I think that some of this has to do with, a lot of it has to do with marketing. The snobbery and the directedness of the snobbery has a lot to do with how things are marketed, but also how things aren't marketed. Part of the lack of knowledge is because of the lack of marketing. Marketing is nothing more than outreach, right? And getting people to hop on board and jump on your bandwagon and say, hey, I want to know more. What's more, what is this? What is this? And a lot of it is because I think hi-fi in and of itself is a lifestyle. High-end audio is a very bespoke section of a larger market. And so it would be interesting if you, for example, a group of we're outside of our community, men and women, and say, hey, what high-end audio brands would you like to have and why? I think we'd get a really interesting cross-section of people, some who might know the things that are sold at, Magnolia and Best Buy, and some who may.
We got a super chat here from a Best Buy employee, Magnolia.
There it is.
I deal with pretentious people all day, and at the end of the day, I just want people to like audio. I work at Best Buy Magnolia and love audio for all. Thank you, Sergi. Please, appreciate that.
That's awesome.
And those are good points that you just made. I think a lot of the high-end, there's not a whole lot of marketing budget in audio, especially these days, right? I mean, you don't even see the print magazines and the bookstores anymore, and I mean, just a lot of the brand, they're not advertising on TV. It's not, it's audio is just kind of a small niche still. So the big brands like Apple and I'm trying to think of other brands that are also involved in audio. Samsung, for example, maybe they have a bigger marketing push because of their budgets. And
But Gene, there's the full circle snobbery. A lot of the brands that I've spoken to, being Veep of the show and stuff, and also being with the acoustics, has been like, oh, but we don't, we're not for everyone. We're not for, we don't want to reach, we're not trying to be, I'm not going to name names that are sold at Best Buy and Magnolia, because I think they're great too. I'm not knocking anybody, but there is this internal industry perception of like, if we go too big, we're going to quote, sell out. And that's not necessarily true. I mean, it might be true.
Say if they get too big, they're not going to be able to keep up with production. I've had speaker companies tell me I can't advertise because if you do a review and then we do advertise and we're not going to be able to keep up with production. I'm like, how is that a bad thing? That your company's going to grow so you hire more people.
Scaling, it's a thing. Surprise, right? Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's some part of exclusivity here. These companies are trying to be hard to reach and hard to attain to make them more appealing. Yeah. Because if you can get it, you can be one of the handful of people that have it. And that makes you special because you're one of the 10 people that bought something. And you're the only one that knows about it.
That's kind of my MO. I like to look for things that other people don't have. Like when I buy a car, I try to get a color nobody has. I try to get a car equipped the way I don't want what everybody has. I don't want a Toyota Camry that all my neighbors have, So I could certainly understand the exclusivity factor. It's a cool factor to have something that nobody else has.
Sure.
And
I got purple speakers
purple
for that
speakers.
for that reason. Yes, exactly. Right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what do we take from this? Be kind, be excellent, and be kind to strangers, because you never know when you're going to be one. I don't know.
Be open. I think be open
yeah.
is a big one. Be open and ask questions. And when somebody says something when somebody states something as fact that you don't agree with, or that they don't agree with you, for me personally, like, I try not to come at it as a you're wrong and you suck, but more like, thanks for sharing your perspective. I'd love to know more about why you're saying those things. It's non-threatening. It gives them a chance to explain. It also gives them a chance to choke on it if they're full of crap, but it also gives them a chance to inform you if they're not full of crap.
And you save face. Put for me at the end of
it. At the end of it, right? Exactly. Yes, right. Exactly right.
Super chat from the high end. Thank you.
No, I think the important thing to keep in mind is nobody knows everything in this hobby. Yeah. Nobody has heard everything. Nobody has tested everything. So everything is subjective at some level. There's some bias and perception of what you've heard over the course of your time based on your hearing and your age and all the other factors, what you think looks good or doesn't look good. So we're dealing with so much. I think we're dealing with so many layers of subjectivity here that kind of promotes, or kind of like you end up in this, it kind of forces people towards the snobbery end of the scale, is maybe part of it, because there is no objective truth or know-it-all person or golden-eared person out there. So without that, there's endless arguing, right? There's no way to win an argument, but there are ways to be civil and encouraging and get people to try things and be open-minded. So it's not everything is doom and gloom. Like, I want to give some hope here that acoustics can be an outlet. Audioholics is an outlet where we're encouraging this kind of debate and inclusivity. And
save the nastiness for the politics. We're here to enjoy. We're here to enjoy.
Wait! Don't start that fire now.
Save it for that. Somebody wants to know what purple speakers. Those are Egglestone.
These are. Oh yeah. Hi Rachel. These are Eggleston Oso loudspeakers, and these are, funnily enough, speaking since Gene's talking about Lamborghini, we worked with Lamborghini on the color. These are a one-off. Talk about exclusive and aspirational. These are a one-off speaker color. These are the only ones in the world, but you can get Eggleston Works Osos from various dealers and all over the world, and they're great. I love them personally. So
someone's asking about Brian's and Emiko.
The autocorrect spelled it as Emilio.
State their opinion on cables. I'll just speak for you, Emiko. I'm right. I'm right and you're wrong. That's it.
Wait.
Is that snobby?
No, but interesting perspective, Gene. I'd love to know why you feel that way for me, for you.
Okay. Yeah. I think more people, more audiophiles won't care to admit the confirmation bias and placebo effect that changing something has on their psyche. So I think a lot of the perceived differences they think they hear in cables, they believe they're hearing a difference. I don't think they're being deliberately deceptive, but I think a lot of it's imagined, and we all fall for that. I've fallen for optical illusions, and I thought I made changes in a system where I switched an EQ and I thought it sounded way better, and then I realized I hit the wrong button. So
oh dear.
Yeah. So that's why I think everybody's victim to that. I don't think anybody's immune. But if you like your fancy purple cables on your elevators and
I don't have purple cables, but I need them. Where can I get some purple cables, folks? Tell me.
We'll call up Kimber and see if they can make
I was going to say, I don't have any purple. I will say this, Gene, coming from the pro audio side, being a musician and a producer, I do believe that cables make a difference. However, I think there's a, I don't want to say a ceiling to it, but I think there's certain things that difference makers, and then there are certain things that are placebo effect, and they're sort of just adding whipped cream on top. So my position is, while it's not entirely identical to yours, Gene, I would say that we're probably on the same cruise ship, but just on different parts of the boat.
I mean, I'm not going to use like dental floss for speaker cable. I mean, I tell people I use 10 gauge cable. I like low resistance cables, and there's scientific reasons why. And I use Kimber. I've got Kimber ATC and APR, and they're super expensive. Well, not super expensive. They're like maybe $30 or $40 a foot.
Right.
So that's pricey, but I like the look of them, and they measure good. So, and I like, it dresses the system up. I've got them in these Rebels back here. So, I mean, you know, I'm not putting them on Tinker Toys though.
I want to bedazzle mine just to, if we're going to go cable risers, I'm going to go all the way. That's
at least you're doing it in style.
Yeah. That's what I want to, you know, that's what I want to put.
Hey, I mean, 10 years ago when I got my other pair of flagship speakers from RBH, I was like, you know what? Everybody's been telling me I should get into vinyl, and I kind of laughed at the whole idea of doing vinyl. Then I got the Marantz TT15S1, which I don't know if you could see it back near that projector. And I had a friend of mine that's really into vinyl. He spent 4 or 5 hours calibrating the turntable for me, and we put on some records, and we put on like Dire Straits, Brothers in Arms. It was a 4-disc set, so it was really well pressed vinyl record. And I was blown away by the sound. I was like, holy crap, man. And just the whole experience of putting it on the platter, cleaning it, sitting down and engaging and not skipping around songs, and then having a full-size jacket in front of you. I mean, it's a great experience, but at the same time, I sit in my theater room and I put on Apple Music and I could read the lyrics while I'm listening. It's a different experience. I appreciate both of them equally.
Yep, there's more than one way to listen to music.
15 years ago, I would have laughed at you and said, I'm never doing vinyl.
So you're open-minded, Gene. You're open-minded.
I try to be, yeah. As I get older, I try to be more open-minded, because as you get older, people tend to be more closed-minded, right?
Right.
So I think that's about it. I mean, unless you guys want to add anything else to discussion, just everybody should be, like Bill and Ted said, be excellent to one another.
Yep.
Get your friends involved. I've had so many of my friends that really are not audiophiles. When they come over and we make it a listening event,
right?
Their eyes open up. They're like, "Holy cow! I didn't think you can hear these kind of details," and they get into it. You know, like I have a dentist friend of mine that would just listen to anything in his car. And now he's like, "When am I gonna come over and we're gonna do another listening session? I want to hear Steely Dan Asia on your system."
Right.
I'm like, see, that's awesome. When you expose someone to good audio, then it gets the wheels spinning in their head, just like any hobby.
Well, that brings up a good point about maybe going to shows to experience some of this. And I know Emiko,
I should not have given that reaction.
No,
sorry.
Like going to shows is like one of the ways. Acoustics will be at the Home Entertainment Show in Long Beach in June, in 2.5 weeks. June
don't remind me.
12th. But I mean, that's one of the ways to like get your feet wet in this hobby.
Yeah.
Sure.
And hear stuff that you wouldn't normally hear. And everyone doesn't have friends like Gene with massive RBH speakers. And I'd love to come over, Gene, and check.
You're always welcome, my friend. Yeah. I mean, I haven't seen you in face to face in probably 15 years.
Yeah, it's been quite some time. It's been well, if you can make it to the show, then that would be one way to do it. If not this one, then the next one.
Would be a tough one for me.
I know, it's a long flight. I'm
going to the Audio Advice show in North Carolina in August.
Okay.
And then CEDIA in September. Are you going to CEDIA? Are you guys going to be at CEDIA in Texas? I think it's in.
Oh, I don't know where it is this year.
I think it's in Dallas.
Potentially.
Yeah.
Possibly. We're working on. We've got the Long Beach show, but then our Denver location is opening, and then Nashville after that. So
I would come to Denver.
Denver.
I'm sorry. I think it's the Scotch. I would come to Denver just for Sushi Den.
Okay.
Well, we would hope that you would come for audio as well, but I mean, no, that's fine.
I've heard all the audio. I just want the sushi. Best sushi I've ever had in my life in Denver, believe it or not. So
okay, I'm gonna as a Japanese person, I would be very interested to experience that with you.
Oh man, we got to do it for sure.
Okay. Okay. Sounds good. But yes, Brian, to Brian's point, audio shows are a great way to experience new things. Ask questions too, because that's a great place to get in with either the designers or the manufacturers or the dealers, and just have a minute with them, right? And
you
not
know what I really like? I'm going to plug AE Acoustics for a second, because Ian, who couldn't be with us tonight, unfortunately, he's doing a great job covering affordable products. And sometimes I think we don't cover enough affordable products. We get accused of that, unfortunately. But I think it's really important to cover the $200-300 pair of speakers, the $200 receivers, the $150 turntables, because again, these are gateway products for people getting into the hobby that don't. They might have more money, they might have plenty of disposable income, but they're not sure if this stuff is really worth it. So I've seen tons of people buy inexpensive speakers, and then they wind up putting that in a kid's room or in the garage, and then they move up. So I think it's great strategy on your part that you guys are covering more affordable products. And guys, if you want to see a lot of reviews of affordable products, go to eacoustics.com and you'll see some great reviews there. And then if you want to see the super expensive stuff, come to Audioholics.
Thank you. No, thank you, Gene, for that. Yeah, no, we've made it a point to really focus on the entry level up to maybe $10,000 price max systems, like total systems, because we need that entry, that gateway, like you said, of people aren't just going to start off with a $30,000 amp or a $50,000 speaker. Like there's some pathway through this hobby, and hopefully we can be that starting point for them. And I appreciate those kind words, Gene.
Yeah, well, we complement each other, so that's why we always got along with each other. And Emiko, I appreciate having a woman's perspective here. We need more women in audio. Get our wives involved, get our girlfriends involved. I mean, it's
also single women are also, you don't have to be attached to a guy. Like anybody that loves music should be involved. And the fact of I just want to say this, I know we're running short of time, but like, to anybody that is out there who is contending with trying to get a female partner involved, keep in mind that there is, just follow me down the rabbit hole here. There's a lot more that audio has in common with things that traditionally you would think women like: accessories, clothes, handbags, whatever, all the things that Brian knows about, apparently. Because you said it, Brian.
Audio wear.
Well, there are, and most of us are loners because there are a lot of audiophile trolls on the forums. But no, in all seriousness, like audio is something that is so, it is so engaging, and I think when it's related to in the right way, it's a zinger. Like it's there for life. Yeah. So,
got a super chat here from KB. Really appreciate the diversity of topics discussed on Audioholics. Going beyond the gear and addressing the community attitude is important too. Appreciate that. Great comment, and appreciate the super chat. And I'll tell you this much. My oldest daughter was never into audio, right? She's got great hearing. She could hear to 20K. I've tested her. She just would listen to audio on her phone, music on her phone, and she'd be content. But how I tricked her into listening to music with me now is we go in the theater room and we watch a couple of episodes of American Dad. So we kind of like bonded over this funny kind of sitcom animated genius show by Seth MacFarlane. And then she's like, well, let's listen to Drake or something. So I put on the music she listens to, Fair Trade, put on Drake, put on The Weeknd. And not only did she experience the good audio, and she's like, she wants to hear more, but now she's kind of expanded my palette of music. Like I never would have listened to rap 5 years ago. Now all of a sudden I'm listening to Drake, The Weeknd, Ariana Grande, just stuff I'd never listened to before, especially because it's in Atmos. So as soon as when I see the Atmos light up, I'm like, I'm listening.
Music snobs, next topic, right? That can get into a whole nother.
Oh yes.
What type of music do you listen to?
I try to listen to everything. I really do. Maybe with the exception of some country, but I mean, I'm pretty open about virtually all kinds of music, and otherwise you just get bored.
Yeah,
Right.
So
that's true.
anyways, guys, that's a wrap. Don't forget
Yeah.
about our Patreon channel at patreon.com/audioholics. We appreciate your support. You get direct access to us if you want to suggest video topics or you want to ask questions. Brian, Emiko, appreciate you guys being here. We got to have you back on soon, and maybe we'll bring Ian next time. We'll do it a little earlier, so
Yep.
it's not past his bedtime.
Right. Right.
All right, guys. Well,
Yeah.
that's a
Thank you,
wrap.
Gene. Thank you. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you for having me, Gene.
Yeah. This was fun.
It's my pleasure. And until next time, my friends, keep listening.